Good morning. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm also delighted with the clever name that they came up with for this event, because I'm in the business of clever names. I'm kind of the trend guy, so I admire Ready to Share as a name, because, of course, it plays right into Ready to Wear. So we need to think, is Ready to Wear really ready to share, or is that an illusion or delusion, possibly, that other sectors may have when they look at the fashion industry? Well, I think the ready-to-wear industry is ready to share, but it's ready or not. Necessity is not only the mother of invention, but sometimes in fashion it's the mother of creativity, too. So I thought it's time for us to take a look at how this fragile ecosystem kind of works. If you think the Great Barrier Reef is a tricky ecosystem, you just ought to dive into the world of fashion sometime. So that's what we're going to do, and take a look at how it all began, because in order to understand where it's at now, and it is so tricky, you really need a roadmap to sort out the maze of creativity, originality, copying, or as they call it in my neighborhood, knocking off. It used to be a very, very formal system, but the world used to be a very, very formal place, let's face it. There was a long tradition of French haute couture, custom-made, so-called original designs by French designers who really had a very, very proprietary ownership of the line, the silhouette. And it was a very, very formal system. Anybody but anybody was allowed to copy if they bought the right. They had to go to the fashion shows, pay a caution to see them, and then they could buy the patterns. They could buy the originals and copy them, and it was a system that worked, and everybody was very, very happy with it. Then along came a man named Christian Dior, who kind of started moving us toward the position we are now in, because he really dominated fashion for a decade and changed it season by season with lines and shapes and silhouettes. But most importantly, he changed the very, very profile of fashion, because he's the guy who really brought in the peripheral arts of PR. He invented licensing. He created boutiques, and he invited celebrity clients to sit in the front row. He was the first one. That tiny little delicate creature sitting there in the middle is Rita Hayworth. She looked much bigger in Gilded, didn't she? He was, of course, succeeded. Christian Dior only had 10 years of creativity before he died, and Yves Saint Laurent took over for a minute. And with Saint Laurent began the switch from the old system to the current system, from line, silhouette, trend, and a grand decree of new fashion every season, to the beginning of what we now call trends. Well, that all happened because you all happened. Well, some of you didn't happen in time to be boomers. Too bad, because the boomers are so important. The population explosion that speeded up the world, speeded up everything, and we can really credit these four guys with helping to invent today's fashion system. Because, just in case you didn't know, the Beatles were English, by the way. I'm going to throw these little educational tidbits in because this is an educational facility. And so, with the Beatles and British music came this big interest in what was happening in London. And that's when fashion exploded, and Paris lost its grip on fashion temporarily, and it's been struggling to get it back ever since then. But when London started to swing in the 60s, all hell broke loose in terms of fashion coming from the street instead of the runways. It was a new system. That lady is Mary Quant, in case you don't recognize her. I lived in London for about 20 years, and I knew Mary, and she had a great story. She's credited with being the inventor of the miniskirt, the originator of it. She says she wasn't. She just said she looked out the window in Chelsea and she saw what was happening on the streets, and she picked up what was in the air. That's important. She also nearly got into trouble for it. She tells a wonderful story about when the miniskirt was just happening and it was big news. You can't imagine how important it was unless you're old enough to remember. She and her husband, Alexander Plunkett Green, happened to be in Rome on the very day that the Vatican issued a decree saying the miniskirt was immoral, a sin to wear. And so she was a little nervous when she went to bed that night. And she was awakened early in the morning by noise out on the street. And she nervously opened her windows, and the street was full of young girls who had placards, and they were chanting, "Viva Minnie, Viva Mary." So fashion won the day, as it always does. But then Paris restaged an assault, and it was really led by a Japanese designer named Kenzo Takada, who opened a very small, politically incorrect named shop called Jungle Jap. He soon changed that and just used his own first name. And the thing that Kenzo did was invent what we now call trends. Trend after trend after trend after trend. He understood that things were speeding up and the boomers were young and fickle and needed to be fed a new look, a new trend every 2 minutes. The great thing about a Kenzo show was that there was more than one trend per season. And boy, you just had to be there. You had to know what was going on. He was the king of fashion. He became a dictator. And he was probably the most copied designer of our time. Whatever Kenzo did, everybody did. And not only did they copy his designs, with my help, I have to confess, they copied his shows. He is the person who really began turning what were trade fashion industry events into media entertainment. He invented this kind of runway. He had horses on the stage. He had elephants. He had Jerry Hall. I mean, it was just fabulous. And you had to see it. Now, Kenzo was no fool, of course. He realized that everybody who was knocking him off was making a whole lot of money, and he started to get a little irritated with that, and it became harder and harder to get into a Kenzo show. You had to have a ticket, for one thing. Sometimes you had to have a stolen ticket or a black marketed ticket, and if you didn't have one of those, you had to climb in through the basement window of the ladies' room. I am the voice of experience here. You had to see it. Well, Kenzo finally got fed up and stopped having his shows. He taught us a lesson, but then Kenzo kind of slid out of the limelight because what was learned from that experience was you had to be in the limelight. You had to play this new game or you were just out of the game completely. The last great look that made the transition, that segued from the old system to the new, was Saint Laurent's famous Russian Revolution collection, the rich Russian peasants. Rich Russian peasants. Only the fashion industry can say this with a straight face and get the world to buy. The world bought. I mean, this was a great look. Instantly, women all over the world, whether they wore and could afford Saint Laurent couture or ready-to-wear, he did the same look in both. They had the boots, they had the shawls, they had everything. It was fabulous. And it really was a perfect example of sharing this creativity. What about trends today? How do they work today? Well, it's a whole different ballgame because trends today follow our shifting society. They do not get invented on a runway. The runway reflects what's happening in our world. And when it does that correctly, then everybody can feed off it. So we have to look at economics, politics, weather, media, celebrities, demographics, sex, wake up, and science. They all influence trends. And everybody, but everybody, can feed off this same information and inspiration and hopefully do it in their own unique, but do we call it original way, if it's all from the same sources? I had a very interesting talk with this old guy over here. He's fabulous. Some of you may know him. That is François Lesage. His family for years has done all of the beading and embroidery and the fabulousness that is part of French haute couture and some high-priced designer ready-to-wear too. Well, he told me that he thinks there is no longer any originality in the fashion business, and he remembers when there was. You're looking there at his archives, which are like a treasure trove. And he said the difference today is that in the past, a designer would, like Saint Laurent, for example, would call him up and say, I want a jacket that's embroidered, and it should bring to mind a chandelier and Versailles and candlelight and all kinds of artsy stuff like that, and he would create something. But now, he said, designers, like Christian Lacroix and Jean-Paul Gaultier come, or their assistants come, and they go through the boxes, and they say, okay, we'll take this one, we'll take that one, and put it on our jeans jacket. This is what has happened to originality as far as Lesage believes. We're going to hear some more about this, but this is a good example of what's going on today. The tweed fringe jacket. I would bet that 90% of the ladies in the audience, and maybe some of the gentlemen too, have one of these jackets. You know, did you get it from Chanel? Did Karl Lagerfeld design it? Did he even originate it? Well, I don't think so, but he references Coco Chanel, just kind of channels her, and people pick up on it, and everybody picks up on the pickup, and it just goes and goes and goes, and it keeps morphing and changing until we just get bored stiff with it, and then we move on to the next thing. The movies are often, of course, as you are well aware, and from that wonderful, wonderful film of those great fashion clips that we were watching earlier, movies are a great fashion force. Here, we have two examples of how it works sometimes. Sometimes it's licensed and makes money, and sometimes it's just there and we feed off it. On the left, that's Joan Crawford. She was living then. And looking... I don't know when she died, but I think she went on making movies long after her death. And that is a dress designed by the great designer Adrian in a movie called Letty Linton. The movie stinks, but the dress was divine. And according to legend, and I think this can't be true, Macy sold 500,000 copies. 500,000 copies? This has to be an exaggeration, but they sold a lot anyway. And over there, that's Faye Dunaway, of course, in Bonnie and Clyde. Now, that came at a very important moment in fashion history because European designers had decreed that hemlines should be longer, and American women hated the idea until they saw Faye Dunaway and they realized that a long skirt could be really hot. And so that was the beginning of the midi. And as long as fashion designers go to movies, there are going to be influences. I, myself, am obsessed with The Aviator, not the movie, the clothes. You know, I come out of a movie whistling the dresses, you know. And I think these are just wonderful. Sandy Powell's costumes, which are, of course, nominated for an Academy Award, and I think we're going to learn more about that tonight at the gala. But one of my favorite dresses was this one that Kate Beckinsale wore as Ava Gardner. And I don't think I was the only person who thought that was a wonderful dress. That's by Marc Jacobs for Louis Vuitton. Try to tell me he didn't see that movie clip or that still. Sometimes the sources come from odd places. This is a wonderful book. If you have a sense of humor, get it. Interior Desecrations. The horribly ugly rooms of the 70s. Now, if you're living in one of these, please don't get your feelings hurt. And don't change a thing, because it is about to come back. Now, whenever I see something outrageously ugly, I know that some cool fashion designer is going to embrace it and make it the cutting edge. And usually that designer is named Miuccia Prada. So if you need inspiration, you probably have some relative somewhere who's very out of touch and hasn't done a lot of interior decorating for about 30 years. Would just go into the bathroom, look at the wallpaper, and you've got next season's hot print. So sometimes an original idea is unoriginal, but becomes original because we're applying it to a new area. But this system, which is so tricky, sometimes fails. And that's when creativity and the law collide. And it sometimes happens in fashion, very rarely, but it does happen. I've been there during some of these collisions. Many, many years ago, during the famous Guess jeans trial, I was deposed as the expert witness because each side thought they could use me to, explain that the other side had copied them. Well, when I was confronted with all of the jeans that they were fighting over, I was able to trace them back to the original source, which was neither one of the parties suing each other for designing them. So it sometimes doesn't work. There are some things that should be proprietary, that you should own. Your logo, for example, should not be stolen. That is not a creative idea. That is an expression of identity. You don't want your credit card identity stolen. Well, you don't want your mouse stolen either. This is interesting. This was a famous case, and it explains why the law should mind its own business where fashion is concerned. A tuxedo, a woman in a tuxedo. Not an original idea. That's Josephine Baker in Paris in the 20s, wearing a tuxedo, for goodness sake. Did she steal the idea from Tuxedo Park in New Jersey, where men first started wearing tuxedos for dinner jackets? No, probably not. Yves Saint Laurent, of course, made the tuxedo his own, called it le smoking, and embraced it. Then along came Ralph Lauren, moving into Paris and making Saint Laurent a little nervous. So Ralph Lauren made that tuxedo dress. Well, not exactly that tuxedo dress. Well, yes, that tuxedo dress, but that is the original, which was made by Christian Dior in 1949. Ralph Lauren recreated that dress, and Yves Saint Laurent sued Ralph Lauren for the concept of the tuxedo dress. So complicated, right? Guess who won? Saint Laurent won the lawsuit. But it was tried in a French court by a French lady judge, so, I mean, go figure. Here's a smart cookie. Coco Chanel. She had a lot to say, and it was often worth repeating. She said, fashion should slip out of your hands. The very idea of protecting the seasonal arts is childish. And then she bottom-lined it with, one should not bother to protect that which dies the minute it is born. So smart. There are big ideas out there that are accessible to everybody, and the originality, the creativity comes with the way you interpret them, what you do with them. Coco Chanel wasn't the only smart person in the world. You know, sometimes smart people aren't in the fashion business. Like, I don't think Oliver Wendell Holmes, and I've spelled that name wrong, but I am in the fashion business, so forgive me. He said, there are thoughts always abroad in the air, which it takes more wit to avoid than to hit upon. So let's look at some of the big ideas that are happening in fashion now that everybody can feed off of. We are having an extreme makeover. We are in the middle of it, thank God. Scruffy, grungy, dirty-haired, flipped-flopped women are not going to be cool in a minute. We are having a transformation, just like extreme reality shows, before and after. It's My Fair Lady, Cinderella all over again, and hey, it always works. Something else that's happening that everybody in fashion is feeding off of is the fact that we are losing our faith in Generation X as the beginning and the end of fashion. Oh, there are a lot of them, 49 million, and wow, you spend $735 million a year on consumer goods. No wonder everything is aimed at you. Well, let's get real, shall we? Let's talk about the forgotten fashion generation, the boomers. There happen to be 76 million of them. And they spend $2.1 trillion a year. Not much of it on fashion, though. You know why? Because they don't want to look like Britney Spears. Surprise, surprise. That doesn't mean that we don't love hip-hop clothes. They're cool. That doesn't mean that we don't think people should expand their markets into younger areas. That's Pottery Barn's junior catalog. But what we need to do is start respecting the fact that the boomers are a force to be reckoned with. I love that dude there, don't you? I took that picture in Saint-Tropez last summer. Nobody told him that his clothes weren't age appropriate. He is still hot. And this is I'm going to have t-shirts made that say, old is the new fabulous. That's Sophia Loren. She's a babe and she's 70. Giorgio Armani is 70. Brigitte Bardot is 70. Karl Lagerfeld weighs 70 pounds. That's not my birthday cake. I hasten to add. I'm going to be 64 in a couple weeks, and I'm glad. But I'm not 64 like my father was 64. I don't think anybody is old the way their parents used to be old. So now I think we have to redefine that. We have to start designing for people who are going to live forever. The sci-fi world, we can all feed off that. Wow, it's changing. So much of the trouble with fashion today is it's not as exciting as technology. More people would rather buy this season's cell phone than this season's jacket. When I was a kid, you sort of bought a television set for your family and it lasted a lifetime. Well, now you have to change them every season because they're losing weight, they're getting skinnier, there are all kinds of things. And that's a Japanese robotic dog up there, y'all know about that. They're on the 4th generation now of that dog, and the computer chip is now so sophisticated that you actually have to train this dog. And if you don't train him well, he'll bite you in the butt. And now, I don't know a lot about technology, but I'm nervous about the idea of a jacuzzi with a submerged TV screen. But shouldn't fashion be that much fun? And it is. Okay, here's something that's changing that's going to be hard for a lot of you people who live here to come to grips with. Our celebrity obsession is about to reach saturation point. It's going to wane. We're going to have maybe some new celebrities, but flashy, trashy, vulgar shockers are reaching saturation point. And maybe, just maybe, we'll get lucky and Paris Hilton will leave. So those are some of the big ideas. What I do to make a living is go around the world and speak to designers and stores and manufacturers and fabric conventions and stuff and talk about the big trends. And then people feed off the originality in their own creative way. I thought I'd just give you a little sampling of the sort of thing I do, and you can imagine how you would work with these ideas to create something new from the forces that are out there of what's next. You have to look at the driving forces. What's changing our world? Well, I think one thing is that we're starting to slow down, not to smell the roses, but to re-examine some things that have been interesting in the past and will, upon closer examination, prove to be interesting again. From that driving force of re-examination, which we're doing throughout our lives, will come some trends: natural beauty, pure design, sublime simplicity. These are some of the cute names I come up with on planes when I have nothing to do. From the driving force of re-examination, we can have a trend toward natural beauty, which is about anti-technology, a respite from our modern man-made environment, which we have to embrace, but it's making us a little nervous and we would like a breather. So you're seeing fashion reflect that. That's why the Costume Institute of the Metropolitan Museum in New York has a smash exhibition going on at the moment called Fashion Untamed, all about looking at nature, looking back at animal prints and patterns and furs and natural textures and natural colors and all kinds of natural materials. So this idea of natural beauty also means that we're going to want more realistic renderings of some natural things. It's why there's a newer thing than organic food. We want locally grown produce. We're getting more intense. The second trend we might extrapolate from the driving force of re-examination is pure design, where form follows art instead of fashion. It's for the sake of creating something beautiful, just to create something beautiful. And certainly, it's shaping our world and reshaping our world. On the left is an ad for an automobile, but I love what it says. It says the fashion industry is so inspiring because it's close to the pulse of what's current and moving forward. You bet. And so it's not just about architecture and interior design. It's what's happening to our clothes. This is going to be such good news to so many people. Clothes are no longer going to be skin tight. Won't that be nice? You can have dessert. We're starting to see balloons, trapezes, swing shapes. These remind me of a statement the great Japanese designer Issei Miyake said many years ago when he was doing these kind of shapes and someone questioned him about it. He said, "Oh, I'm not designing clothes shaped like that. I'm designing the airspace between the body and the fabric." Is that a wonderful, creative way to think about design? The final trend is one that I think is going to revolutionize a lot of lives. We are going to move toward sublime simplicity. And it's a reaction to the kind of design overload we've been having a hell of a good time with for the last decade. It's time to downsize, divest, scale down. And you know why? Because The rhythm of fashion is like a pendulum. It goes back and forth. And so we have spent the last decade, with Tom Ford's help, getting over the minimalism that slowed fashion down so much in the early 80s when everything was simple and black. And that was so exciting for about 30 seconds. But we held on to it for a decade. And then along came the 90s, and it was a whole lot more fun. But now we've pushed that envelope so far that we're like licking the envelope instead of pushing it. And the need now, the hunger, the rhythm is to react to the fact that there's too much going on in our lives. There's too much going on in our closets. There's too much going on in every garment, every accessory that we own. One of the reasons is that we're simply in mental overload. A recent study crossed my desk that I found fascinating. Are you aware that the average American is confronted with between 3,000 and 5,000 advertising messages every single day? Overwhelming, but you know that. The surprising thing is the study revealed that at the end of each day, the average consumer can remember over 1,500 of them. No wonder we have no time to catch our breath. So we've spent the last decade buying stuff, because it kind of makes us feel good, and we get a lot of catalogs, and we keep ordering, and we can do it online now, and so this is kind of what we're living in. But it's time to purge. We want a breath of fresh air. We want to start again, a clean slate. It's starting to affect interior design in a big way. And this is where fashion is at right now, and oh my God, you're probably falling off your seat. There's just so much going on. It's so exciting. Wow, wow, wow. Beads, sequins, embroidery, fringe, all that jazz. Well, yeah, that's very exciting, but how long can we keep it up? This is not a person in fashion right now. This is Carmen Miranda, and I've always had a crush on her, so I try to work her into every presentation, I have to be honest. But this could be by John Galliano. It could be by Christian Lacroix. Okay, and it's a whole lot of fun, but, we're kind of tired of it now. So let's have a little breath of fresh air, fashion-wise, too. Isn't it wonderful? It's like Prozac to wear. And so finally, this is where I think the new fashion will go. You can say it's retro. I don't know why we have to do that, but we do, so it looks kind of like Jackie Kennedy and Audrey Hepburn, late in the 50s, early in the 60s. But it's about simplicity. It's about subtle color. It's about luxurious fabrics. Deluxe minimalism is the cute trend phrase that I'm going to be shoving down people's throats for the next couple of years. So you heard it here first, deluxe minimalism. Get some in your closet as soon as you can. So that, I believe, is what we are now ready to share. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak to you this morning.